In lesson 1, we looked at the life cycle of a cell, and now we're going to look in lesson 2 at how cells are organized. So their levels of organization. The two key concepts to keep in mind and to be able to try to answer by the end of this podcast is how do unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms, how do they differ? And how does cell differentiation lead to the organization within a multicellular organism? Now, you're not familiar with differentiation. That's going to be something new. You should be familiar with what unicellular and multicellular means. Uni means one. Unicellular, the organism is one cell. Multi, many. So multicellular is an organism that is made of more than one cell. If you have an organism, which means a complete living thing, and it is only composed of one cell, that means that that one cell has to be able to do all of the life processes. It has to do everything because there's not any other cells. So when we studied about the characteristics of life that an organism has, it has to carry out all those characteristics. And here are pictured 3 unicellular organisms. So they give you some examples in here of some of those life processes. It says including responding to the environment, getting rid of waste, growing, reproducing, all within that one cell. Now we get into the terms that we've studied before, so this is just a review of prokaryotic and a prokaryote. A prokaryotic is the adjective. So a prokaryotic cell, if it is a unicellular organism, that means the organism is a prokaryote because it only has one cell and it's prokaryotic. A unicellular organism that is a eukaryotic cell then is a eukaryote. Now remember, what is the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells? Hopefully you got it right. It goes back to the membrane surrounding the nucleus. In a prokaryotic cell, such as bacteria and blue-green algae, they do not have an organized nucleus. Yes, they have DNA, but they do not have a membrane, a nuclear membrane around that DNA. A eukaryotic cell does. So when you have a unicellular organism and it doesn't have an organized nucleus, it is called a prokaryote. And if it does have that organized nucleus with the membrane around it, it is called a eukaryote. That's the noun. Here's your definitions again. This is a review of prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. A cell without a membrane-bound nucleus is prokaryotic. A cell with a membrane-bound nucleus is eukaryotic. Another difference has to do with other membranes. The only membrane that the prokaryotic cells have is the cell membrane, because remember, all cells have a cell membrane. But if you look down there at the picture at the bottom, which is a eukaryotic cell, you see some structures in that cell that you do not see in the cell above it. You do not see ribosomes. You don't see vacuoles. You don't see Golgi bodies. You don't see endoplasmic reticulum. Well, ribosomes, yes, you do see, excuse me. You don't see endoplasmic reticulum and mitochondria. Why? Because all of those structures are membrane-bound as well. So another difference between a eukaryotic cell and a prokaryotic cell is these membrane-bound organelles that we studied in the last chapter. Multicellular, many-celled organisms are made of many types of eukaryotic cells. It's not like all of the cells are the same. Take a human body, for example. You have skin cells, you have muscle cells, you have nerve cells, you have neurons, which is a cell, you have blood cells. So you have cells, all different kinds of cells that are working together, each cell having its own specialized function or functions. Sometimes they have more than one function. It's not like one cell. The main difference again is the one cell, unicellular, that cell does everything. With multicellular, each individual cell does not do everything. They have their specific jobs that they do for the whole organism. A good example in the human body is the islands of Langerhans, and they are some special cells that are found in our pancreas. They make insulin, which is what regulates sugar in our blood. They are the only cells in the human body that make insulin. That's their job. And our human body without insulin would die. So they have a very vital. But they cannot carry oxygen, so they can't get their oxygen needs. Other cells, different cells, have that function of carrying the oxygen, and so on and so on. Here's how we all began, and we've reviewed this, talked about this, so this is actually a review. All cells in a multicellular organism began as one cell. All humans, animals, anything that reproduces sexually. And if they reproduced asexually, it would begin as a cell as well. It's just not called a zygote all the time. But in sexual reproduction, when a sperm and an ovum unite, that process is called fertilization. Or if you talk in biblical terms, it's called being conceived or conception. That fertilized ovum, which you see pictured here on this slide, is known as a zygote. Now your book uses the term egg instead of ovum. I do not like using that term because really an egg is what chickens lay and other birds and reptiles. So it's not really an egg. It doesn't have all those parts of an egg. It is called an ovum, singularly, ova, plural. We'll study that more in the next chapter. And the ovum is actually the female reproductive cell, and the sperm is the male reproductive cell. And so in that sperm and in that ovum is half the DNA of that organism. So if we're looking at a human, half of the DNA from your mom, half the DNA of your dad became you, the zygote, that had the full DNA code for you. Your unique DNA code. Now look at that cell. Is that one cell a liver cell? Is it a brain cell? Is it a bone cell? No, it's not specialized. It doesn't do any one special type of function yet. So as soon as it is ready, it will divide into two cells. Again, not specialized. Those two cells into 4, 4 into 8, 8 into 16, 16, 32, and so forth. On and on and on, until you've got this glob of cells, which none of them are specialized. And then something built in by God will trigger the cells then that are starting to be made to become specialized. And that process is called cell differentiation. Cells are becoming differentiated. They become specialized. So you can see there in that picture, the sperm is uniting with the ovum, creating the zygote. And then eventually, the cells that are non-specific, non-specified, don't have one particular job to do, they will start specializing and making. So one cell, okay, this cell is going to become a nerve cell. This cell is going to become a red blood cell. This cell is going to be some epithelial cells that are lining your intestines. This is going to be some striated muscle cells, and on and on and on. So when this starts happening as you are developing inside your mother's womb, that process is called cell differentiation. That's the process. Now, here's a diagram from your book showing you this. The sperm unites with the ovum and produces a zygote. The zygote then produces cells and some more cells, but eventually those cells start becoming specialized. Some will become nerve cells, some will become red blood cells, some will become bone cells, some will become muscle cells, and on until you have all your cells being specialized and becoming different parts or different parts of you. This unspecified cell is known as a stem cell. Now you may have heard, because a big buzzword now in the biology realm and in the health realm is stem cells. There's stem cell research, greatly talked about. And a stem cell is just a cell in an animal that has not specialized. It has not become a muscle cell. It has not become a bone cell. It has not become a ligament or a tendon or whatever part you want to talk about in our human body. So that's what stem cells are. And they're very important now in research because stem cells have the potential to become any kind of cells. Now in plants, they have similar type unspecified cells. They too started off as a zygote, and that zygote developed into 2 cells, 4 cells, and so on. These unspecialized cells that are similar to the stem cells, they are in areas that are called meristems. We'll talk more about meristematic tissue that is found in a plant when we study plants. So we'll refer to them as meristematic cells. So they're unspecialized. The areas that you find them in, and this is what meristematic tissue has to do with, it's areas of growth. So if you think about the growth of a plant, the 2 main parts that you think of is at the tip of the root and at the tip of stems, because the roots are growing longer and the stems are growing longer. There are some meristems that are in the sides. They're called lateral meristems, which controls the growth of the width of the plant. But those are areas that you can see that have been highlighted and enlarged. That's where you find a lot of growth. So if you find a lot of growth, what do you find? The process of mitosis, which is what we've been studying in the last chapter, in the last section. And we also looked at it under the microscope in the root of an onion tip. When cells are specialized then, there's certain cells that group together because they have a common function to work towards. They're working together to carry out a specific task. And we call those cells similarly grouped together, those similar types, we call them tissues. Now there's lots of different tissues, but we're going to look in the next slide. There are 4 main types of tissues that we have in humans. Here you can see an arm, and they're pointing to some of the various tissues that are found in different parts of your arm. Here are the main types. So you need to know this is a listing question. The main types of tissue that are found in animals and in humans: muscle tissue, which of course you can think of the muscles, the biceps that you show off. Connective tissue. Now by the word itself, hopefully you could get a clue as to what connective tissue does. It connects. 2 kinds of connective tissue that you probably have heard of are ligaments and tendons. That's connective tissue. Nervous tissue is what makes up your brain and your spinal cord. And epithelial tissue is what lines a lot of your soft organs inside, such as your stomach, your colon, your small intestines, your pancreas. It lines your respiratory tract. It lines your digestive tract. It's the lining inside of your mouth, your cheeks there. And it's also part of your skin. So that's epithelial tissue. Plants have tissue as well. And a lot of people don't think of plants as having tissues because they don't have the same kinds of tissues that we do. You don't need to know this for the quiz. We're going to study plants in detail later on in the year. Actually, it's the last quarter of the year. And so we'll learn about these different plant tissues. Now, so the organization so far is when the cells become specialized, they then will group into different groups and become tissues. Tissues then that work together for a specific goal, a specific function, that is known as an organ. So organs are groups of different tissues that work together to perform a particular job. A good example is this illustration here of your stomach. Your stomach is an organ. Now look at all the various tissues that they are showing you making up the stomach. You've got muscle tissue. Actually, there's 3 different layers of muscle tissue. You have connective tissue, which holds your cells together. You have nervous tissue. You have blood, which is a liquid tissue. You have columnar epithelial. That's what lines it. That's the epithelial type. So all of those together are working towards digesting your food and mixing it with digestive juices. And so that is called an organ. So cells then make up tissues. Tissues then make up organs. What do organs that are working towards a common function then produce? They produce what your book calls is organ systems. I just simply refer to it, they produce systems. So organ systems are groups of different organs that work together to complete a series of tasks. And here are 10 examples of systems that are found in the human body. We'll be studying several of them, the top row, but we don't have time when we study the human body to cover them all, because there's actually, when you get to high school, you have a choice of taking a science class that is called Human Anatomy and Physiology. And that's a whole year class of studying the human body. So I want to show you a short video clip here showing you how the cells are organized in a plant and how the cells are organized in animal cells or organisms.
Cells in a many-celled plant do not work alone. Instead, each cell depends on other cells in some way as the organism carries out its functions. A group of the same type of plant cells together form a tissue on the outside of a plant leaf. In many-celled organisms, cells are organized into tissues, which are groups of similar cells that do the same sort of work. Each tissue cell carries on all the functions needed to keep it alive. The cells in a tissue may look alike. Different tissues are further organized into organs. An organ is a structure made up of different types of tissues that work together to do a particular job. Several different tissues make up a plant leaf, an organ of the plant in which food is made. In a many-celled organism, several systems work together. Leaves, roots, and stems in a plant work together to keep the plant alive. In a similar manner, animal cells interact with one another to help keep the whole organism alive. Animal cells lack the rigid cell walls of plant cells. Cells with similar functions within an animal form tissues. Different tissues are organized into the different organs of an animal, such as this human. Your heart is an organ made up of muscle, nerve, and blood tissues. Other organs, such as kidneys and lungs, are also made up of different tissue types. Different organs make up organ systems. Your heart and blood vessels make up your cardiovascular system. The last level of organization is the organism. Your body is made up of many organ systems, including your cardiovascular system and your digestive system.
Now, did you catch about the organs of a plant? Again, a lot of people think, well, they don't have a stomach, they don't have a brain, they don't have lungs. That's true. But they do have organs, because what an organ is, a group of tissues working together for a common function. And did you catch the 3 types of organs? Stems, roots, and leaves. Another organ would be if the plant produces flowers, that's an organ. So those are organs found in plants. Now, what is a complete living thing? It's an organism. And all organisms are made up of cells. They could be made up of one cell, which is called unicellular, or they can be made up of more than one cell, which is called multicellular. If they're unicellular, that one cell can either be prokaryotic or eukaryotic. It can lack an organized nucleus and not have a membrane around it, or it could. And that one cell has to carry out all of the processes of life because there's only one cell to do it. In a multicellular organism, then you have, and this is true of two kingdoms, kingdom Plantae and kingdom Animalia, plants, animals, and humans. They are made of cells. Then the cells are grouped together that work for a common function, forming tissues. Tissues that are grouped together working for a common function are called organs. Organs that are grouped together for a common function is called a system. And then all the systems in that organism all the systems are referred to then as the organism. And that's how the level or the levels of organization of cells go through. Now, one that they don't mention in your book is also a multicellular organism, but it's found in kingdom Plantae, kingdom Animalia, and also with the bacteria, and that's what's called a colonial organism. It is multicellular, but the difference between colonial and the other multicellular plants, animals, and humans is that I liken it to like a colony. They can live together and they prefer that. They share responsibilities. But if you isolate and take one of those cells out of the colonial organism, such as a mushroom, it can live. Whereas in the multicellular organism, take us for example, we take a skin cell out, put it into the right environment, and it's not going to survive. It has to rely upon other cells. And so that is one not mentioned in your book. You don't need to know it for a quiz or a test. I just wanted you to know that there is another group or organization of cells, and they are called colonial organisms.